Okay. Welcome everyone to the Tenement Museum's book talk this evening. We're featuring Honey and Venom, Confessions of an Urban Beekeeper by Andrew Cote. I'm Dave Favaloro, Director of Curatorial Affairs, and I'm glad to be with you virtually tonight. Thank you for tuning in. Before we get started, if you're watching this event live, you can ask questions and add comments for our participants throughout the event. We'll have dedicated time, of course, at the end of our talk tonight to speak specifically to your questions, but please feel free to ask them throughout the event. If you're not familiar with the Tenement Museum, we're a museum that tells the stories of immigrants, migrants, and refugees in the United States on New York's Lower East Side. We're a history museum located there on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, and a museum that finds its foundation, interestingly, in stories and storytelling, particularly those of ordinary New Yorkers and how they have shaped and continue to shape our city. Tonight, I'm joined by Andrew Cote, expert beekeeper and author of Honey and Venom. In the book, as we'll get into this evening, Andrew takes his readers with him on his daily apiary adventures over the course of a full year in the city and across the globe. Andrew and his book are filled with compelling stories of bees and beekeepers in New York and elsewhere, of their intertwined histories, of the urban ecology of the city, and of ordinary New Yorkers that he met and continues to meet throughout his work, and some more noteworthy or well-known or even famous, I guess you might say, New Yorkers and other folks as well. I think perhaps most compelling of all of those stories is Andrew's own, which he weaves throughout the book, and we'll explore that in detail this evening. Before I introduce Andrew, I want to note that Honey and Venom is available for sale, and we're partnering with the Strand Bookstore for book purchases. Please see the link in the chat for information where you could purchase that book. Go directly to the link. So again, it's my pleasure to introduce you to our speaker tonight. Andrew Cote is New York's most well-known beekeeper, fourth-generation apiarist. He is founder of the New York City Beekeepers Association, executive director of the nonprofit Bees Without Borders. He's a Fulbright scholar, a former college professor. Having read the book, I now know that his apiaries have crowned the Waldorf Astoria, the Museum of Modern Art, or MoMA. They reside on the North Lawn of the United Nations, above stores, hotels, restaurants, schools, churches, and synagogues. So loads of places throughout the city, community gardens, even cemeteries, some really noteworthy ones, really throughout the 5 boroughs. So you may also have seen Andrew in a variety of different media over the years. He's been featured on The Martha Stewart Show, CNN, CBS, Cake Boss, Dr. Oz, Good Morning America, and in the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, HuffPost, The Atlantic, and a variety of other outlets throughout the world. And of course, if you visited the Union Square Green Market over the years, you may have met him there. He also runs Andrew's Honey there at the New York City Green Market, again in Union Square. So it's my pleasure. Welcome, Andrew.
Hi, Dave. It's great to be here. Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. It's not the heat. I'm blushing.
Well, you know, with all of those accolades and accomplishments, it's not difficult to speak at length about the many things that that you've accomplished. So, we have a lot. Go ahead.
Being the most well-known beekeeper is kind of like being an amazing plumber. You know what I mean?
Well, maybe.
It's a small pond, is all I can tell you.
I see. I see. Well, you know, if it's okay with you, we can dive right into some questions and, really sort of talk about some of the things I think that were, interesting to me as a historian who works at the Tenement Museum, and the perspective of, somebody who sort of explores the history of immigration and New York City more broadly. So, I think one of the things that I found really interesting and was hoping you could share with our audience tonight was really, I mean, it goes throughout the book, but your own journey, how you came to beekeeping. If you wouldn't mind kind of starting off telling us a bit about yourself and really how you came to your chosen profession, as small a pond as it is, how you found yourself to that place.
I guess just lack of other opportunity and ability. just led me to beekeeping, perhaps. Just no other skill set, no other idea of what to do. It could have been that, or my father is a beekeeper and was a beekeeper. So I wanted to spend time with him as a younger person, as a 9, 10, 11-year-old. I wanted to spend time with him. And he was a busy man who made a lot of time for his 2 boys and his wife. His family was and is everything to him. But he maintained beehives. And the best way to get time with him alone, exclusive time with him, was to go out with him in the bee yards. So I really got into bees just through my filial piety toward him. It had nothing to do with an interest in bees. It had everything to do with an interest in him.
And how is it that your father came to beekeeping? You're originally from Connecticut, is that right?
Yes, I am from Connecticut, from Norwalk, Connecticut. My father is the son of a beekeeper. His mother was a beekeeper, however, and her father was a beekeeper, and his father was a beekeeper. But there was something like a 30-year hiatus in beekeeping in our clan, because when my father and his family came down from Quebec, the farm was no longer part of their lifestyle, and that was it. But when my father was working as a firefighter for the city of Norwalk, which he did for over 30 years, he took up beekeeping on his own. But at that time, there were no clubs. His mother wasn't available to assist him, so he was self-taught. And then in time, he joined a club, the Backyard Beekeepers in Weston, Connecticut, a great club, a really great club, one of the best in the country. And he went forward with it. So it's a broken line, but it's a long line of beekeepers in the family.
Yeah, it sounds I think like, and it comes out in the book as well, sort of that you're very connected. The practice of beekeeping to you is connected in an important way to your family history. You mentioned having come from Canada, so sort of immigrant roots, and the beekeeping really sort of being tied to that. And it sounds like an important component of how you really envision your place in this larger world of being a beekeeper.
Well, like many people in the U.S., I am the child of an immigrant. However, well, I mean, hyper technically, my father was born in Norwalk, Connecticut, then went back to Canada, then came back. The family was sort of going back and forth a little bit. But I mean, my father only spoke French for a while until, in their benevolence, Winnipeg Elementary School kicked him out because he didn't speak English. They kicked him out until he learned English, because things were different in the 1940s. But I mean, it wasn't perhaps such an arduous journey from Canada to the United States, but nonetheless, culturally, linguistically, it was a different world for the Coté family. My mother's side, they've been in this country for many generations, but beekeeping was part of their legacy to me, and I'm glad. I feel fortunate, lucky that it's so.
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting family story that's sort of woven throughout, I think different parts of the book, and I think gives it a really nice, connection back to your own personal past. But, that's not the only exploration of the past that factors into your journey in the book, right? And I think as a historian, I was really interested, of course, in the ways in which you touched on the history of beekeeping, specifically in New York City, I think, but also, kind of in the broader world. And so, what about that is important to you? What about that history? Why was that important to you to include in the book? Yeah, that you wanted to share.
Which part? Sorry.
The history of beekeeping in New York City, or more broadly.
Well, one reason that I think it was important is that many people, first of all, I get much more credit than I deserve in general terms. as far as beekeeping in New York City goes. I was part of the effort to legalize beekeeping in New York City in 2010, but I was a small part, truth be told. I mean, I enjoy the accolades of it, but really there were a lot of people pushing for it. However, this is not new. There was a fellow named David Graves who also sells honey at the Union Square Green Market. He's been beekeeping in New York City for longer than I. Prior to that, there was another person. Prior to that, there was another. If you keep going back 120 years, you find out that people were keeping bees on top of orphanages and hospitals in New York City. People were keeping bees on Broadway. There was a woman keeping bees on Broadway down in what's now known as the Canyon of Heroes in the 1860s. There's a wonderful Harper's Bazaar article about her.
Interesting.
There was a group keeping bees on top of a building on Park Place, I believe, in Brooklyn in the 1840s. And they bred queens that were distributed throughout the world to the Sandwich Islands, all over the world. So beekeeping in an urban environment, and definitely in New York City, is not something new. And I didn't fill the book with that history. I think that maybe could fill another book. But
sure,
I did try to mention it because it's even Delancey Street down near where you all are located. There were beehives down there on Orchard when Orchard Street was in Orchard. So honeybees have been pollinating the Big Apple since before it had that moniker.
And is that the I think a lot of, I certainly was surprised at the extent and the degree to which beekeeping had been such a significant part of the city's history and practiced by so many New Yorkers dating back, as you were just saying, to the 17th and 18th centuries, right? Before the city as we know it really existed as an urban landscape. And so, what about beekeeping wasn't important to those folks? Like, why were they doing it? The orchard makes sense to me, I think, on a ecological level, probably, I think. But some of the other folks you mentioned, why were they beekeeping in Manhattan or Brooklyn of all places in that period?
Well, for example, when I mentioned the orphanages and the hospitals, that was a source of sweets for their kitchens. It's like people like to cultivate their own honey because even in a place like New York City, which is described as a concrete jungle and there's no nature,
Sure.
It's nice to connect to nature with that little box of calm. You've got 70,000 flying, stinging, venomous insects, and it can be frightening. And yet somehow counterintuitively, perhaps, it's calming and it's nice to be able to work with them. So just working with the bees is my favorite part. I like honey, but it's not nearly my favorite part. Most people look at honey as the prize, and it's important. But working with the honeybees and having them crawl on my skin, that's the part that I really enjoy.
That's super, super interesting. Exactly, to me, it would be probably initially a nerve-wracking experience, but I can sort of begin to see how that works for you. And so, I mean, you've touched on this, I think, a little bit, but I'd love to explore a little bit more about, why keep bees in New York City today? What is it about beyond the pursuit itself, as you were just saying? Is it important to the ecology of the city? Is it different in some way than, say, keeping bees in a rural or maybe even a suburban setting? What makes it distinct and why is it important?
Well, I don't know that it's important, but I know that we don't need, even as much as I enjoy the Tenement Museum, we don't need museums. We don't need these things, but we love them and we embrace them, and they make our lives richer and better, and in the case of the bees, sweeter. And I think that it allows us to, like I said, connect to nature. I think that it gives us another perspective. And there are 258 types of pollinators, apis, meaning bees, flying around New York City. So we don't need these honeybees, but they really do enrich our lives. So I enjoy keeping them. And you ask why keep them, and I really would have to say why not keep them, because it's so enjoyable, it's so wonderful. And I mean, people walk around New York City pushing carts all the time that hold little tiny canine whose feet have never touched the ground. And I don't begrudge them. I celebrate their love of the puppy, but I mean, they don't need those dogs, right? It's just something we enjoy. We can connect to another living creature in a way that I think enriches us and touches us.
Particularly in a place that sometimes seems so removed from nature, right? As
Yeah.
you know, I think on occasions it strikes us in the city. One of the things I thought I was really interested in, some of the sites of your apiaries, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Or great, first time. And particularly, as a historian thinking about the some of the sites at least seem to be in places that were, formerly industrial sites, maybe along the riverfront or elsewhere, had fallen into disuse in the last 30 or 40 years, and really seemed to be being, quote unquote, redeveloped in some way, and that there was a place for your work there. I'm thinking particularly of, say the Brooklyn Navy Yard, or Industry City, also in Brooklyn. And so, why are those sites important for that? How does that all fit in?
Well, so if I take a colony of honeybees and I establish them in point A, they will fly for 3 miles or 5 kilometers for their forage. So if I put bees down on top of Industry City, as I have, they will probably make beelines for Greenwood Cemetery, which is just I don't know, a quarter, half mile from the city, because you've got, I don't know how large that is, 400 or 500 acres of beautiful old growth trees. And most honeybees in New York City will go for the tree nectar and pollen. So I've read, I don't know if it's true, that something like 25% of New York City is in the shadow of a tree. And the trees provide most of the nectar that the bees use to make honey. So in the spring, I get a lot of linden, so the honey is light with a little mint and citrus. And in the fall, there's a lot of Japanese knotweed, which is a heavier and more herbally honey. So the Industry City or the Brooklyn Navy Yard. So those areas are very well suited for honeybees because there's plenty of growth there, even if it's just the wildflowers that grow up. A good example, I think, is East New York, Brooklyn. East New York, Brooklyn is now in the last several years being sort of discovered, I'll call it, by hipsters and so on. I may be using an antiquated term, but East New York, Brooklyn is a community that is mostly at the moment Afro-Caribbean, and it's a wonderful place. A lot of good gardening, community garden. There's East New York farms and other places out there that create an atmosphere that's very conducive to honeybees having great forage. But that's the result of ugly practices. And right now, here we are, we're talking about honeybees and this book, and outside, we are all dealing with some more than others, dealing with COVID and dealing with other issues that are important, that are at the forefront. And so in the 1960s and 70s, neighborhoods like East New York or Brownsville were redlined. And this does connect to honeybees, believe it or not. So there was what's called a white flight from those neighborhoods. So a lot of the Irish, the Jewish, the Italian families left. And who moved in? People who had, as new immigrants, and in this case, it happened to be Afro-Caribbean immigrants, less money. So a lot of times, what the departing families did was, because they couldn't sell their homes because the area had been redlined, they burned them. and they tried to collect insurance money. And as a result, over 30 years, you ended up with a lot of vacant lots. Those vacant lots sprouted wildflowers, community gardens came up, the hard work of the hardworking immigrants, and the honeybees thrive there. So some of my finest honey comes from that area. So
interesting.
Areas like the Brooklyn Navy Yard also, which fell into disrepair, had similar issues. And areas like Sunset Park also has had, although it's experiencing a revival, areas that just fell into disuse. And so you ended up with wildflowers and the bees love it. So the the bees just want to find a flower. Any flower to them is aristocracy.
That's wonderful. Your story about working in East New York, I find that fascinating, and that certainly is a troubled history of that of the city generally, of the country that you touched on there. And I was wondering, in some of the work you're doing there in the community gardens, do you have the opportunity to work with the community to teach them about beekeeping? Is there some, I'm wondering about interactions with, whether it's East New York or elsewhere, the kind of interactions you might have with folks who live in the communities where your apiaries essentially live or exist.
I'm very fortunate. We also run a charity, a 501c3 called Bees Without Borders. And if you want to be thoroughly unimpressed, you can visit our website, which is just a series of like flashing photos, because it's all volunteer. So if any of your people out there want to help us, beef that up, we'd be all for it. But we have worked with East New York Farms itself and with other community gardens out there. And we've worked in the South Bronx, and we've worked in Haiti, the Republic of Moldova, Fiji, Uganda, Zimbabwe, Nigeria, Kenya. We've worked all over, and we try to assess what we think they need, hear what they think they need, find some common ground, together make a plan, and then implement that plan. And that's from finding local carpenters, because usually it's a one-off. We can't really afford to go to the mountains of the moon many, many times. So we go, we try to help them establish a good methodology for moving forward, and then we are done, because we can't repetitively go. So we find local carpenters who can build the equipment. We find people who are interested in doing this and teach them how to do things. It's not that they don't know anything about beekeeping, because some of the communities have done it for millennia, but there are different techniques, and there are challenging new problems, like the varroa mite is a relatively new problem, and not everybody has the means to deal with it. So we work together. So we've done that from Brooklyn to as far flung as you can think of.
Right, fascinating. Yeah, you've really been all over, kind of sharing your knowledge and your expertise. You've sort of visited so many interesting places throughout the book. Of course, one of the most interesting stories, and it's certainly within the confines of New York City, so not one of the more far-flung places that you visited and shared that expertise. But as a museum person, a museum professional, of course, one of the most interesting stories was your interaction with the Museum of Modern Art. And I was wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing some of that story, how you came to work with the folks at MoMA, and what that project was like, maybe what you learned from it, and it's just such a compelling story.
Well, there's so much to that, and it was so fantastic for me. I received an email from somebody at MoMA who had been referred by Dr. Lou Sorkin, who's at the museum up here on the west side, the Museum of Natural History.
Right.
And he suggested that I assist them with a sculpture by an artist, a French artist named Pierre Huyghe. Pierre Huyghe had replicated the I may get this a bit wrong because I'm not an art guy, I'm a bee guy. The head of a Max Weber statue from the 30s, and then some kind of body on it. And in short, he wanted a beehive to become the head of this statue, with comb that the bees built and with live bees on. And then that statue to be placed in the sculpture garden there at the MoMA. Now, as coincidence would have it, his art studio reached out to me a few years before the MoMA did. So I was familiar with this, and I had assisted them in figuring out the way to do this, because you can cajole nature, you can bend it, you can persuade it, but you can't really make it do anything you want. You can make bees do certain things, but in the end, they're going to do what they're going to do. So in short, the artists, I don't know if they sold or what, but they got a statue to the MoMA. The MoMA shipped it to our farm in Connecticut, which farm is almost an exaggeration. It's a very small plot of land. And we convinced the bees to build a big nest on the head of the statue. We then moved the statue to the museum, and that's that. For 2 or 3 months, 10,000 visitors a day would walk past the statue and take pictures of it, and they were the most famous bees in the world. And from my perspective, it was great because the statue had to be covered at night. So twice a day, early in the morning and late at night, I would go and cover or uncover the statue, and I was totally left alone in the museum because the guards didn't want to go anywhere near those bees. So I'm sitting there next to these Matisse and Picasso, this little goat or something from Picasso. And it was fantastic because I should have learned a lot, but I'm really a Philistine. So I saw beautiful things, didn't understand them, and then went home. That's what I did.
What was it like working with the curators and the staff at the museum on that, and the artist, I guess? Yeah, what was that? Was it challenging or difficult or interesting, or did you all just get along?
We all got along, and it was one of the first times that I really felt so comfortable because they respected my choices and decisions about the bees, and that doesn't always happen. I do a lot of commercial or TV work or movie work where people want bees in this. They don't want this. They want the bees in a scene, and I will tell them, oh, we can do X, Y, and Z. But they say, oh no, I want A, B, and C. And I'll tell them, well, it's February, it's 40 degrees, the bees can't do this, but they always try to bend nature. The MoMA was the polar opposite. They were professional and great, and they deferred to my knowledge, and quite frankly, I deferred to my father's knowledge a few times because a couple times I was stumped. It was a great experience. Yoko Ono happened to have an exhibit there at the same time. And at one time I got to bump into her, and that was pretty special for me.
Right, very cool.
Happened. I mean, I'm a regular guy. I'm from Connecticut. I don't hobnob,
Sure.
So I had a great time there. I love the MoMA folks.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Yeah, I recall also, I'm not sure if it was that location or another, where you worked with some folks to create a hive, actually two, right? One that was, essentially a kind of recreation of a tenement, and one of a sort of New York City kind of brownstone townhouse. Is that right? Was that also at the museum?
That was at MoMA. So there are a lot of businesses that hire me to put bees on their roof, but in this particular case, because we had that sculpture there, I wanted to make sure, just in case those bees got sick or died or swarmed or absconded, that I'd have replacement bees the same day. So I wanted to put 2 beehives on the roof, but I had this great family, this New York family. They run Mikado Safari, the Pintos. So they had 2 kids in high school, and both of them, Sasha and Tristan, were helping me on and off. And Sasha got wind that I was doing this at MoMA, and she said, no, Andrew, you've got to make those hives special. So to me, special means a new coat of paint. But for Sasha, it meant make them look like a tenement, make them look like a townhouse. So
Right.
she really just made them gorgeous. So they're beehives. And honestly, the bees
Right.
don't care. The bees can live in a refrigerator or an old air conditioner. But in this case, we made them works of art because they were on top of the MoMA.
Right.
Nobody saw them but us, but we saw them.
And you chose, or you kind of collectively chose those particular building types because they're such an important, sort of ubiquitous kind of, architectural type in New York. Is that?
I mean, honestly,
sort of quintessential.
I will tell you that I took all of the credit, but all of the credit belonged to Sasha because she did it all. However, yes, I believe so. She had even these external fire escapes on the buildings. They were great. I have pictures of them. Everything we talked about, I'll post up on my Andrew's Honey Instagram later.
Great. And I think we're gonna have the link to your Instagram up in the chat at some point this evening, so folks can find there.
Nice to have other than relatives looking at it. That would be.
Sure. I bet. Yeah, I mean, it's the MoMA is only one of, and you've mentioned a couple others thus far, but really a host of New York City, sort of a collection both of ordinary places, quote unquote ordinary places throughout the city, but also names of buildings and places that folks would recognize, landmarks, so to speak. And are there any that really kind of stick out to you in your mind? I hate to say if you have a favorite, right? You don't want to play favorites necessarily, but if there's one that you're particularly fond of. Oh, okay, great.
I'm not. I mean, I shouldn't have favorites like with children or whatever, but I do have a favorite, and it's Ballet Tech. It's on 19th and Broadway, and I work with Maggie and Jason, and it's a great building. It has a green roof, and it has phenomenal views. It's 3 blocks from the Union Square Green Market, where I'm there Monday, Wednesday, Saturday. So I get to visit those bees a lot, and it's my favorite. And it's my favorite because it's a building. It's something like 110 years old, more or less. Freight elevator up, then a couple of flights up walking, and you get up on the roof, and no one's allowed up there. So I'm up there alone. I've got my bees there. I can see the Empire State Building and all kinds of, so it's just so calm. It's got the water towers, which is such a New York thing. However, I have a lot of favorites after that. Like I work with the Durst organization, and they're the best partners one could have. I've got beehives on several of their properties, and the best are on the One Bryant Park. It's the Bank of America building. We have 10 beehives there. I've had them on the Brooks Brothers building, hotels like Barclay Intercontinental, New York Hilton Midtown, all over the place. So there are a lot of places I love to keep them, but really it doesn't matter to me. I love working with the bees. If they're in my rusticating apiary in Norwalk, Connecticut, or if they're up on top of the Waldorf Astoria, where I've also had them, that's fun. Because when I'm inside that beehive, when I'm in there working, I can't think of anything else. I'm not worried about any problem. Nothing bothers me. Or if it does, if I'm distracted, the bees will instantly let me know that there's a problem. They will let me know and draw back my focus. Right.
Yeah, it sounds like both in some, at least in some senses, you're solitary and really just being able to focus, push the kind of the outside world aside, at least for the moments you're with your bees. And that that makes me think of you had sort of gestured to this, I think, earlier, and I've wondered, obviously not something you write about in the book, but the world is in a series of going through a series of crises now: public health, economic, anti-Black racist crisis as well. And so, have any of these things affected? Yeah, how have these things affected your work? whether it's COVID-19 or any, any of the things that that have really been all of us as New Yorkers have been experiencing, at least in some way, over the last several months.
I'm going to answer you, but first I'm just going to give you a little preamble that I am not on a ventilator, and those who are closest to me and who I love are healthy and safe.
That's
and
great.
I eat every day, and I'm not in fear for my safety. And so I know I am very well aware that I am lucky, and it's nothing to do with being smart or anything else. It's just dumb luck. And also, I know that I have lived a privileged existence for a long time since I was born, compared to many. And I know that we're talking about honeybees, and I hope having a good time talking about that. It doesn't mitigate what's going on with COVID or with the Black Lives Matter movement to me at all. And so, to answer your question, yeah, business is down. Because all of the restaurants in New York City closed for a long time, and they were big customers of mine. But it's okay. I mean, it's okay with me that I'm selling less honey. Honey doesn't spoil. It's not like a relationship, it's always good. So I can hold on to it for later. So there's not a lot coming in now. It's all right. I know things will be better for me, and I hope things are better for others. And whatever I can do, I'm going to do. I don't know how to get into it now, because I'm still listening and learning and trying to understand my role. Because even though I thought of myself as a very open-minded man, I now recognize that there were things to which I was just not tuned in. And so I'm in a learning moment. And I'm not calling on anyone to educate me, although I do welcome that. I just want to figure things out better. So yeah, business is down, but most people's businesses are down. That's okay. We will survive. And if we don't, I'll do what most people in my multi-generational family have done. I will do some other work. I used to teach, I'll teach a night class. I'll do something else. It's no big deal. It won't be the end. So I don't know if I quite got your
No, I think that's a great. That's a really great answer.
Sorry, it's an emotional subject. I wish I had a better response to that. I'm sorry.
I think that was a really heartfelt and thoughtful response. And I think I just want to, as you said, we're having a conversation really about beekeeping and honey and these sorts of things, but they're taking place in a larger context that I think we always want to be mindful of. And I second what you shared there, and many of us, including myself, feel similarly. So thank you for sharing that. We're getting a lot of questions. I don't want to I want to make sure we have.
See them. I don't know. I'm only listening. To you.
I will share. I'll read these questions for you, so you don't have to worry about that, and you can respond. But we've gotten quite a few, which is really terrific, and I want to make sure we have time to get to all of them.
So I got nothing but time. Don't worry about it.
All right. So one of our audience members has asked, what are the flowers that the bees use over the annual cycle? Are they dormant in the winter? Do you move them around?
Do I move the bees around?
I think that's not the flowers. That's what I'm gathering from this question. Do you
Yeah, I guess it'd be tricky to move the flowers around. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I wasn't trying to make fun of anybody. Okay, so migratory beekeeping is a thing. And that is some beekeepers will follow the bloom. They will take their bees all the way to, in fact, half of all the beehives in this country will go out to California in February and pollinate the almonds.
Oh, is that right?
And they'll move to the next and the next and the next, and they'll keep going. They'll go to the North Dakota for the clover. They'll here and there. They follow the bloom. we don't do that so much. We do sometimes move our bees down to Florida in the winter, but it's more to help to keep them alive than to pollinate orange groves. Sometimes we have in the past gotten Tupelo honey, we've gotten orange blossom, but not usually. Usually, what we do in our family, we're a very small business. We are not a big enterprise. We are sideliners. There's a hobbyist, then sideliners, then commercial. We're not commercial. So we have small pollination contracts. We do some blueberry, some raspberry. So we will move some of our beehives around. And we will do that so that those farmers can get their fruits, vegetables pollinated.
Right.
And our bees will, of course, get nectar from that, and we'll get the honey, and that's great, and then we'll sell it. But pollination is the name of the game when it comes to beekeeping generally. That's a bigger income generator than sales of honey, for example.
Right. That's great. One of our audience members is asking a question about, protective equipment, which I think, the image of the beekeeper kind of comes to mind for so many of us. And this audience member is asking, how many of you beekeepers do not wear protection when handling and inspecting? Do you?
Well, listen, I've seen the videos too on YouTube where they're not wearing protective equipment. And sometimes I don't wear protective equipment, but I'm going to be warts and all with you guys. Usually, if I take off my veil and gloves, I'm doing it because there's a camera there and I want to have a better picture because it just looks better sometimes. But that's only going to be in the spring. I guarantee you that beekeeper who takes off their veil and their gloves put their veil and gloves on in the fall, because the earlier in the year, the bees are very gentle and docile and there's plenty of food available. But come August, during the dearth period, when there's nothing available for them to eat, or in September, October, when they're getting ready for the winter, they're extraordinarily aggressive. And you won't see that beekeeper not wearing protective gear. If they do, they will immediately get their comeuppance.
Right. So you really have to be attuned to the seasonal changes in how the bees themselves sort of live out their lives. That's really interesting. The follow-up question is one that you're probably expecting here, which is related to how often do you get stung, and how do you prevent getting stung? How do you often do you get stung / how do you prevent it?
Okay, how often am I stung? Many times. My father taught me to not react to getting stung, because when I did, he would laugh at me. He'd laugh at my brother. He'd laugh at whoever gets stung. So we didn't want to give him the satisfaction. So we tried not to show any kind of reaction at all. But how do you prevent getting stung? Okay, if you're working with bees, it's inherent in that you may get stung. So you, as a beekeeper, might make sure to wear your gear. Make sure that gear is clean. Make sure that you're not wearing any kind of perfume or aftershave or scent. Make sure you've got your gloves on. Make sure that you haven't eaten bananas, because bananas have a scent that smells like death to bees. Make sure that you haven't been having any alcohol. Not that anybody would do that when they keep bees. Because all of those scents bother the bees and will make them a little bit more angry. Also, just go slowly, gently, use smoke. There's a lot to tell, but be aware of the weather. If it's about to rain, if the barometric pressure is high, there's a greater likelihood of getting stung. So slow and easy, smell nice, in and out, less chance of getting stung.
Smell nice to the bees, I imagine, right? You wouldn't want to wear perfume or
no perfume, because if you smell like a flower, they will investigate you.
Right. Then
you'll find out.
Gotcha. Another viewer asks, Andrew, you harvest honey from hives. You harvest honey from hives located all over the city. In your opinion, what neighborhood has the tastiest honey?
I'm going to answer you, and yet I'm hesitant to do so because I don't want a whole bunch of hives springing up in that neighborhood.
Okay.
I'm going to tell you, okay? I'm going to whisper it. Rockaway Beach. And I'll tell you why Rockaway Beach. Because, well, I don't know why, but something that's growing out there in Jamaica Bay and all these areas that nobody's interested in and that you can't build on them, but there's stuff growing. It's the most delectable honey to me that exists in New York City and perhaps the world. So my favorite honey is from Rockaway Beach.
Really interesting.
There you are.
Is that something that's a recent development, or has that always been the case in the years that you've been working?
I think ever since I discovered that, it's always been the case. And I used to keep my bees at a Buddhist monastery out there called Buddhist Insights. So I guess I shouldn't get too like attached to it, but it's great honey, and I really like it. I also had some at a community garden on I think Beach 101st Street.
Okay.
But there's just something growing out there that's not found elsewhere, because other honeys from New York City, they taste great, but they have more in common than not. But the Rockaway honey is an exception.
Oh, so interesting.
I think you can buy it at andrewshoney.com just in case, but I'm just
We'll
not to promote.
Have to give that a try there for ourselves. Another viewer writes, "Hello, Andrew. In all the places you've lived and traveled, how do people's attitudes towards bees, beekeeping, and the medicinal properties of honey vary?" I know you write a lot about kind of cultural traditions in the book, but if you want to speak to that question a little bit more here, it'd be great.
I've lived all over the Middle East, and there is a huge respect, a great reverence for honey and the honeybee. I think the Quran has a whole chapter dedicated to.
Oh, is that right?
To that. Yeah. So that's probably the answer. Yeah. Really
interesting. Yeah, somebody is also asking, I know in the book you talk about, or you mentioned before, having been on, a variety of different sort of TV shows or movies. And so this viewer is asking, which movies have you worked on? I don't know if you want to include TV in that as well.
You know what? I said movies, didn't I? But you know what? I think it hasn't been movies. It's been more TV and commercials.
Okay.
I didn't mean to mislead anyone. I'm sorry you had to call me out, but I think it's no movies that you would have heard of. They were all low budget and student films. But usually it's been a commercial or a TV show. TV shows like Blacklist, or did a really fun commercial, one of those I Heart New York, one of those I Love New York commercials.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, Spike Lee directed it, and it was great. I got to spend like 2 hours hanging out with Spike Lee, and he was so afraid of the bees. He wore 2 hoodies and a veil, and they're all covered up, and it was cool, because that's, for me, I used to be a projectionist at a movie theater, and I saw many of his films, and I've got Mookie there with me, and he's afraid of the bees. It was the best thing for me. So
right.
Those 2, we've done Cheerios commercials, athletes, foot cream commercials, all kinds of stuff. But no big name productions for films. Like I know that there have been honeybees used in a few movies, like that one with Nicolas Cage. I can't think of the name right now. The Wicker Man, maybe. But
okay. I think I know that film you're mentioning.
A lot of little stuff.
Okay, very cool, interesting. One of our viewers asking, is your market, which I think they mean at the Union Square Green Market, is that open during the pandemic, during the last few?
Yes, and let me tell you, I am so in awe of what Grow NYC Green Market has done. They never closed. They adapted very well. They instantly set measures that would protect the farmers, the staff, and the customers with social distancing, masks, gloves, marks on the ground. So we never closed. A lot of people have come to the market. I'm at the Green Market at Union Square, but they're all over all
Right.
5 boroughs, I believe all 5 at the moment. But they have worked so hard and made it a safe place. And to me, to my mind, it's much better to shop outside than to be inside. You can always distance yourself there. So it's, yeah, we've never closed. We're still open. I'll be there tomorrow. And
Great.
it's, yeah, that's a great question, because I'm so happy what they've done. They've just really done a great job.
Yeah, that sounds like an important resource for a lot of
Yeah.
New Yorkers and vendors. It's an important place to a lot of people.
Definitely.
It's noting here Professor P. West from the Bee Club. This is called that specifically, so I don't know if that's somebody that you know. And there,
Dade County.
that might be the case. Yeah, it's not in the question here, but this person is asking, what about the medical uses of bee venom?
Well, okay, that's called apitherapy,
Mhm.
where people use honeybee stinging to help alleviate problems like multiple sclerosis or arthritis, and it's been used for thousands of years. And I write about it a lot in chapter 10, October, when my father and I go to China and we visit a doctor who specializes in apitherapy. There's also a great doctor here on 57th Street, Dr. Fratellone. He raises his own bees. He uses bee venom therapy. So I'm reflexively going to say, like I say at the market when people ask me medical questions, I am not a medical doctor and I can't really give any kind of medical advice.
Sure.
But I will say that there does exist the practice of apitherapy, and there's even a way that people can, because when bees sting, they die. When honeybees sting, they die. Their abdomen tears out. But there is a way to get the venom out of honeybees without killing them, and so apitherapy is interesting. It's worth looking into. There's a great institute. I may get it wrong. American Apitherapy Association. I think that's a little off. But if you look it up, they're based in Long Island. You can find out more about it, and it's a wonderful American Apitherapy Society. I think it's a great group.
Okay.
Great group.
Very interesting. So one of our other viewers here is asking, where in New York City can we see honeybees?
Right now, at this very moment, there are many colonies of honeybees all over New York City. In the northwest corner, near the ping pong tables at Bryant Park, there are 2 beehives. Down at Battery Park, there are beehives.
Oh, okay.
And there are beehives really all over the place. A lot of community gardens.
And these are I don't know if that's the appropriate term, but they're indigenous to that. They're sort of organically arising, those hives. Nobody's.
No. In fact, the honeybee was once referred to as the white man's fly, because it is not indigenous to the Americas at all. There were many types of apis, of bees, but not the honeybee. The honeybee came over from Europe in, I think, 1621.
Oh,
but
interesting.
Anyway,
okay.
Yeah, these are in beehives. They're in boxes, like these white boxes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, and in fact, when the Native Americans would begin to notice honeybees in the forest near them, they would know that there was probably a settlement or some white settlers relatively near to them. The honeybees were there. So those are the 2 places in Manhattan that I can think of. But there are so many. You'd have to check with local community gardens. But there are.
Right. So community gardens are a good place.
Yeah.
To seek out. Very interesting.
Clinton Community Garden on 48th between 9th and 10th in Manhattan.
Okay.
So.
Great, thank you for that. Sorry, just looking for the next question here. One of our viewers asks, and I think as we're kind of approaching the end of our hour together, this is a nice way to kind of begin kind of wrapping up. And this viewer is asking, are honeybees making a comeback in this country, or are they still endangered? I wasn't aware myself that they were, so I don't know if you want to kind of answer that in a kind of holistic way. You know, whether what's the status, I guess, of the honeybee population in New York or the country generally, I guess. beekeepers?
It's a tough question. Generally, on average, it's about 30% don't make it through the winter per year. But honeybees are kind of like chickens. We can keep breeding them and breeding them and breeding them. There are a lot of factors that impact the honeybees' health. Climate change doesn't do them any favors. Varroa mites don't help. Certain pesticides are not friendly to them. There are a lot of things. So it's not that honeybees are endangered for no reason. It's that our big agro farming community that demands more almonds and more avocados and more apples and all the way to zucchini requires more honeybees, because without the honeybee, we wouldn't be able to pollinate the foods that we eat. And that exponential demand for food requires more honeybees, and we can't really keep up with that. So the honeybee is not endangered, but the honeybee is in poor health because of our need for more of them.
There's a lot of these pressures on the population and an increased demand, it sounds like.
There are others who could explain that better than I just.
Gotcha. Yeah, not surprisingly, one of the viewers, I don't know if it's the same audience member who's asking a follow-up question, but we've all seen this in the news recently, and that's about murder hornets and whether or not they're having an impact on your bees. Sounds like you may have fielded this question before.
Don't worry about the murder hornet. It's not going to be a problem. Even the name is not a great name. I understand that there were some news stories about it, and I saw today in the paper a story about a spider in Texas that's the new problem. In short, the murder hornet, so-called, will not impact your life at all, and it will not bother us in the foreseeable future. But I will tell you that this insect, this Vespa, this wasp, has impacted beekeeping in Asia. But we don't have the same honeybee that they have in Asia. We have Apis mellifera, and they have Apis cerana. Now, cerana has developed a method to deflect that murder hornet, so-called. And the YouTube video suggests that they get on the hornet and they raise its body temperature. But if you were to read the actual study, which I don't know if it's in English, but in Japanese, what really happens is that they suffocate the hornet more than they raise its body temperature. Now, the honeybee that we have here in North America has not developed that technique to suffocate or raise the temperature, or however you want to call it, of that hornet. So luckily, that hornet is not really a problem here. I know that 1 or 2 nests were found in the northwest, but don't worry about it. You'll be all right.
It's the frightening name, right? I think murder hornet really.
That person has a better chance of being struck by lightning twice in the same place while buying a winning Powerball and Megabucks ticket at the same time than encountering a murder hornet.
Well, that's a really helpful way to end because I'm afraid we're out of time. I'm sure you could go on at greater length about your sort of wealth of knowledge. So I want to thank you, Andrew, for joining us this evening, sharing the stories of your apiaries and your life and your beekeeping with us. Once again, we want to remind our viewers that we're partnering with The Strand, an independent bookstore in New York City, to sell copies of Honey Venom, Confessions of an Urban Beekeeper, which will ship immediately. Please see the link in the chat or visit their website for more information. And of course, stay tuned for future Tenement Museum virtual events by signing up for our newsletter on tenement.org. We hope you'll join us again. Take care, everyone, and have a good night. Thank you again, Andrew.
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks, everybody, for watching. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.